people are damn good listening to. And that's part of the coaching work that you're getting into as well. And some of those questions that you've just asked to your patient, what's that looking like for you, the coaching side of things?
It's really interesting journey. I think what appeals to me about coaching is it's almost the complete opposite to the medical model, because it assumes that people are enough, that they're whole and they have all the resources and solutions within them. And actually what they need is the space, a safe space to be able to sort of reflect and think, and perhaps somebody to guide them with that thinking and that self-awareness so that they can reach their potential. So that's the appeal to me. It's the complete antithesis of the current model we've got. I think what's been really interesting on the journey is that in general practice, it makes you realise how much we're fixers. That actually you have a 10-15 minute appointment with a patient with a list of problems, and we're trying to get through the list and fix. And what I've had to really learn to do is shut up and listen, because actually just the whole appreciation of levels of understanding, I realise that most of my life I haven't truly listened. And I think there's a quote by somebody around how we listen. Do we listen to reply, or do we listen to understand? And I think there's actually 4, even 5 levels of listening: active listening and deep listening. And I'm trying really hard now to actually consider how I listen, and I'm doing it with my children. It's really paying off, actually. Just being really present and really interested in what somebody's saying to me, rather than thinking about the next thing I've got to do or being distracted. And so I think not just in work, but in every aspect of our life, more listening would be really good.
So listening is, and you're right, those levels of active listening, it's draining, isn't it? If you've listened well, it really drains you. Who is there for you, Karen? So I'm guessing it is huge emotional stories and roller coasters that you're riding. Who's Team Karen, and who have you got around you then on the journey with you?
Do you know what's been really fascinating? I think the last 5 years while I've been working in this space is I've been quite shocked at how that really unsettles the system, and actually being a bit of an agitator is really frowned upon by lots of people in the system. And I've had a smear campaign against me. I've been labelled as a mad GP and unprofessional and all sorts of things because I'm passionate about supporting people, which is just crazy when we're working within health, isn't it? And what I found, I'm really, really fortunate. I have an amazing family and partner and children and friends. But actually, what I'm currently doing is I've stepped outside the system because I've realised that I can do work the way I want to work and create this model that I want to create by finding a tribe. So I've actually linked in with, I've now got sort of a bit of a network across the UK of compassionate warriors, people who have this shared vision with me and purpose and really want to make a difference for sort of the most vulnerable people in our society. And that tribe is growing week on week, actually. It's great.
The Oral Apothecary is sponsored by Jamie Hayes Executive Coaching and OneLessPill.com.
So, Karen, I think you've got the listener right where we want them. So let's move on a level now. And I'm sure you've given this due consideration, as all the guests have who've come on. So these are about powerful memories. So what would you like to offer as your desert island drug for the Oral Apothecary?
Do you know, I thought long and hard about this, and what I'd like to do is offer all antidepressants.
A BNF chapter. That's a new one.
A whole chapter, yeah.
Which chapter is it? I'll look up which chapter it is.
4.3.
I was reflecting on which sort of drugs had most impact on me in my career, and I got thinking, when I was a newly qualified GP in the early 90s, the consensus was that actually depression was due to a chemical imbalance. So again, there's that medical model of there is something wrong. You have a problem with your brain, the chemicals are not right, we will give you a drug to fix it. But actually what you find in practice, anecdotally, is yes, for some people there might be an improvement. Some perhaps people with the more severe symptoms might benefit, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people just go on higher doses, and you're changing the drug, and they're not really getting better. And I remember probably about 5 years ago, I had a day where almost every person I saw that day in general practice came in with either a social or an emotional problem. And I remember just feeling really helpless, just thinking, what have I got in my armoury, my toolbox? I've got 10 minutes to give you of my time. I'm not an expert in social problems and mental health. I've got 10 minutes, I've got a prescription pad, and I've got sick notes. That's what I can offer you. Or I can offer you a referral to sit on a waiting list for a service that you might get bounced back out of. Or if you need psychological therapies, you might sit on that for, I think it was 4 or 5 years was the waiting time. That's the offer. And you think, that's grim. And I felt so helpless and so frustrated that I just wasn't serving my patients well. I just wasn't doing what I guess I went into medicine. I always had this, it sounds quite very cheesy. I had this naive feeling that I wanted to help people. I wanted to sort of really contribute and help people. And I remember that day just thinking, what's this all about? I'm not adding any value here. I can just give somebody a sick note and a prescription for an antidepressant. Actually, that's not going to fix the problem. And so it was sort of, that was sort of a point, I think, a turning point in my career where I thought, I can't do this anymore. I can't do general practice. But actually, what next? And it was the sort of start of that journey of actually there must be a better way we can do this.
So in actual case, then, what you're saying is that the antidepressants were the turning point for you. That's why it's such a powerful memory, and that's why you're picking it as a desert island drug. Okay, great. Love that. Fits very well with your story, I'm sure.
That's a great story.
First person to have a sub-chapter of the BNF.
It's not a drug, though, is it? It's not a drug.
Okay, well, if we're going to force you then, which one do you want? Which one did you prescribe most?
Well, I have to say Prozac was the in one at the time, so that was the new magical drug, wasn't it? So let's go Prozac.
Oh, let's take that.
People may have forgotten, haven't they? And it wasn't that long after I qualified when the hype around Prozac at the time and the, I suppose, marketing, the mainstream media sort of went along with it. It was irresistible, wasn't it? I mean, it was you know, you still feel it now. You still have that feeling when you talk about Prozac and that reputation. That
I am not making this up, but downstairs on my bookshelf is a book, and it's called, listen to what you just said, Listening to Prozac.
Well, there was a book called Prozac Nation, I remember, which was about someone took Prozac to see what impact it would have on their art. It was everywhere. The hype around it was unbelievable.
Okay, we'll take Prozac. Okay, what about a career anthem then?
I struggled a little bit with this one, and you know, my immediate thought was The Drugs Don't Work by Verve. Thought that would probably be really appropriate, but then actually I thought what was really more meaningful for me, and particularly the journey over the last 5 years, is actually make your own kind of music, and I really like Paloma Faith's version of that. So that's the song that I play if I'm heading off to an important meeting or a presentation or a conference. That's the one that goes on, and actually it just reminds me about the importance of being authentic, that actually even if you feel that you don't fit in the system, stay true to yourself, stay true to your values and your purpose, and find your tribe, find those like-minded people that get what you're doing.
Excellent. Love a bit of Paloma Faith.
You're doing well, Karen. You've got 2 correct so far.
Yeah. Authentic as well. Very good. Yeah. Okay. So what about a book then to recommend for the Oral Apothecary Library for our listeners who are very much enjoying the book choices, I must say?
I've got 2. I know I'm not allowed to have 2 books, but I have 2 books. And I wondered whether you might like to decide between you which one you'd like.
Okay.
Oh, coaching. See, options.
This is good.
So I've got, and the theme is exactly the same in both. These are the 2 books that have completely transformed my thinking. Lost Connections by Johann Hari. So that's all around the causes of depression, and he talks about these 9 causes of depression and things like trauma, loneliness, disconnection from your values, disconnection from nature. So that's a really big one. And the other one is The Body Keeps the Score, which is Bessel van der Kolk. They both got great names that I probably haven't pronounced right. And he's a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist who specialised in trauma. And what's really fascinating, he talks about the effect that trauma has on the brain. So if you're exposed to extreme levels of stress or adversity, it actually affects your brain. So that physically makes you respond differently. So it affects your relationships and your behaviour. And he talks about how we work with people with trauma, and he says the most essential thing is supportive relationships.
Okay, we might have to give you both because I'm not sure I could give an opinion. Anyone?
Well, the Johari one, what was it called again? I've
Lost Connections.
I have read bits of that, and I know people who work in mental health and other areas do call it a bit of a game-changer book. It's one they often recommend, so I'd go for that one, but I like the sound of both of them. Okay,
let's try and stick to one. So we'll go with Lost Connections by Johann, what was it?
Hari.
It fits with the theme, doesn't it, of he in that book, I think, talks about this medical model of depression that's all about chemical imbalance, whereas he's saying it's not. It's about lived experience and environment. I think he talks about a lot, doesn't he? I think it fits in very nicely with your opening pitch.
I think I'm going to have to read that straight away because, no lie, in a consultation today, I did use the word chemical imbalance for somebody with a mental health condition.
Well, and your chemical Kickstarter?
I'm nothing but honest, am I, on this?
We'll have to review all these now.
Okay.
Are we good? Okay, STC to introduce our micro-discussion next.
Well, as you know, listener, we like to think that this isn't just thrown together on the Oral Apothecary podcast, and it is indeed Mental Health Awareness Week. I'm sure that everyone is aware of that. Because we knew that Karen was coming on, we wanted to search high and low for a suitable highbrow article Now, unfortunately, Jamie gave it away at the beginning because I was going to give you a big diatribe about how we went far and wide. We've had the BMJ, we've had the Lancet, but no, this week we've gone for the Daily Mail. Thanks. I say thanks. I don't really mean thanks to my dad because my dad will be horrified. He doesn't read the Daily Mail, but his wife does, my mum. And so he cuts things out and sends them to me to use on the Oral Apothecary podcast. The thing we'd like to talk about, and it is serious a point, and although we don't normally go with the Daily Mail, we hate it as health professionals probably.
Hate's a very strong word. After everything Karen's just talked us through, you've come in with we hate.
Okay, well, you know what I mean in relation to the way that they do things.
We dislike all papers.
Yes, okay, fair enough. But this is, and we don't like their campaigns, like we're going to win the World Cup and it was the Sun that won it kind of thing. But the Daily Mail is trying to take a serious stance about the use of gabapentinoids and how they've kind of gone out of control in relation to use in anxiety disorders and have become perhaps the new Valium. Discuss.
After that introduction, I think it's quite a reasonable read, as risky as the drug it's replacing, alarm bells ignored, long-term use despite concerns. That's how they've jumped through the narrative. I don't think we can argue with it, can we?
No, I agree, Jamie. I thought it was a well-written piece. Obviously, they've got the far end of the scale stories in there to illustrate it, but it's a real-life example, and I think it's probably fairly illustrative. One of the things I did when I read this, and I know you did the same, Jamie, because we shared the same picture on our WhatsApp group, was we were looking at the prescribing figures. Now, this was for Wales, but they've been going up since 2017 when the prescribing indicator was introduced, I think. So this is a growing problem.
It's one of the edgier WhatsApp groups I'm on.
So, Karen, what do you think?
Yeah, I see this all the time. I mean, the guys that come into the surgery, they're all wanting, Pregablin. Can you increase my dose of Pregablin? And I was reflecting on this when I looked at the article, and I think, again, as sort of perhaps primary care prescribers, several years ago when Pregablin first came out, we have this whole sort of debate around opioids and safe prescribing. We have all these people that are dependent on prescribed opioids, so you're sort of trying to avoid the opioids. And then there was a bit of a thing about anti-inflammatories, and anti-inflammatory gels weren't effective, so don't use those, and you sort of run out of options when you've got somebody there who's desperate and you've got 10 minutes, you think, what can I give them? And Pregablin came out with sort of an indication for pain, and you think, oh, this is reasonable, safe option. And so actually there was this big surge of using it, and I think now it has sort of really spiraled that patients know about it, and particularly those drug-seeking patients, and if they can't get it prescribed, they buy it, but then they buy all sorts of things. So it's a real worry, real concern. And for me, I think it just shows that we need an alternative offer, because actually whatever drug is not going to fix the problem, is it?
I think because us three are of a certain age, one of the things we often pick up in this is the recurring themes that have occurred throughout our career. And this sounds like something that was happening in the 90s around benzodiazepines. I know that hasn't gone away. It's the same sort of situation, isn't it, I think, whereby GPs push for time or you're not quite sure what to do and no alternatives, end up prescribing things like benzodiazepines, and in this case now gabapentin, because of the lack of options and lack of want of anything better to do. And this theme comes around time and time again.
That's essentially what they're saying, isn't it? It's filled the void. It's a bit like squeezing the balloon of antibiotic use. You move from one to the other. But going back to Karen's point about models of care, they were talking today about all this big billions of pounds of post-COVID money to try to deal with the big waiting list. Stop building new hospitals. We don't need new hospitals. We need to use that money to look at different models of care. And the kind of stuff that you're just talking about, Karen, is exactly, surely, the kind of lottery windfall that you need to be able to take it and spread it further. I'll say one thing about Pregablin. We've always talked about desert island drugs, but I do polypharmacy deprescribing teaching, and as well as DIDs, we have DUDs, which is dirty, useless drugs. And I'm telling you now, have a look in the BNF. It's got the longest list of side effects in the BNF.
Thank you. Can I read a letter out in response to this, okay?
Was it to the Daily Mail?
It's not from the comments section, is it? The Daily
No.
Mail.
It's not my mum, is it?
It's from a GP partner, Dr Peter Churn, and he wrote this to the British Journal of General Practice 2 years ago. And after I read it, I did write back to him and said, I loved your letter. And so here it is. For years, we've been steadily climbing the defunct WHO analgesic ladder, inexorably gaining more and more medications and their inevitable side effects. Constipation, sedation, depression, anxiety, dependency, and so on. I'm reminded of the wonderful children's book by Julia Donaldson, A Squash and a Squeeze. In it, a woman living in an idyllic rural location is frustrated by her lack of space. She calls a wise old man to help. One by one, he introduces more and more animals into her house. First a hen, then a goat, a pig, and finally a dairy cow. Chaos ensues, and the house feels even smaller, and the woman more and more alarmed until she throws her arms into the air. I'm tearing my hair out. I'm down on my knees. Yet the wise old man has a plan, for one by one he withdraws the animals. Chaos lifts, and the woman is struck by the newly appreciated space in her house. So I urge you to take off the fentanyl patch, stop the